Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show that covers all things marketing. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast gives you the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. Whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand, you've come to the right place. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and today's episode, we're talking about William, we're talking about Kate, we're talking about Meghan and Harry. That is right, we are talking about the royal family. On a previous episode of the podcast, I talked about America's royal family. I talked about the Kardashians. And a lot of people online and a lot of people in our comment section were saying that we should do a podcast on the British royal family and how they use marketing to sort of handle conspiracy theories, dramatic things that may happen within the family, how they handle their publicity, and really just how they're able to create a brand using their family and using their name. So we're going to talk about all that and more on today's podcast. We're going to go over some examples of how and when they did it. I'm going to give you some specific steps of how and why they used marketing in certain situations and how you can use it to manipulate your own brand and your own marketing. So all of that and more on today's podcast. But just to get started, I would love to just update you guys on what is happening in the marketing world. So our first story of today comes from the story that I absolutely love following. I'm sure everyone who is a steady listener to the podcast has heard me talk about this so much over the past couple of months. Netflix versus Disney Plus. This has been an ongoing battle. It is not even close to the end, but I love when we find out something new about it, about how Netflix is trying to improve their software, or how Disney Plus is just coming out with really great ideas, or maybe when Disney Plus missteps, when Netflix missteps. It's always just so interesting to watch and evaluate. And today is no different. Netflix is taking a move in the right direction by signing a deal with Studio Ghibli. I'm very sorry if I pronounced that wrong. It is Japan's equivalent to the Disney status as a maker of animated feature films. Obviously, Disney is an international brand and is internationally known for creating animated films, but this Japan company is apparently their equivalent over there, and I looked into them. They do seem to make some very amazing and creative movies and animated features, so it will be very interesting to get some of those onto the Netflix site. It's also very interesting just to see how Netflix is sort of taking a look at what they're going to be doing this year and what kind of content they want to be producing. I was reading an article the other day that also said Netflix is going to try to lean more into the rom-com route. And so this is telling us that they're going to lean more into the animation route. So I do think it's going to be a mixture of both, but I think Netflix understands where it shines, where it can compete with Disney, and how it can effectively use their marketing dollars to market this new content. So that is super interesting that not only are they signing a deal with Japan's equivalent to Disney, but they're also apparently creating movies with people who used to work with Disney directly. This is a very smart move from a content perspective, but it's also a very smart move from a marketing perspective for them to talk about it already, for them to say, hey, Disney, we're not afraid of you. We can create the same level of content. In fact, we're actually going to use people who created your content to come create our content. So we're going to be able to compete. We're not dropping out of the game. We're playing the game. In other news, Disney Plus has said that it has now reached 28.6 million subscribers, and it's only been out for a couple of months. So what will be interesting to see what happens with all of Netflix's new content that is coming out, both the animated and the rom-coms, and also Netflix original shows that have been slated to come out with their final season this year, versus Disney Plus's growth over the next year. A lot of people are estimating that the 28.6 million may be a peak and they'll slowly get a little bit bigger, but who knows if they're going to double in size or even triple in size, because maybe all the people who wanted to sign up are signed up. I don't see a lot of people who are like humming and hawing about their Disney Plus decision. So it is going to be interesting to take a look at these numbers a year from now and see how many people stayed with Netflix versus how many people left Netflix for Disney Plus. Our second story of today is very fitting for today's episode. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle could turn Vancouver, Canada into the next Martha's Vineyard. So this was a super interesting story that I read only because, for a lot of reasons. One, from a marketing perspective. Obviously, we're going to talk about that too. But two, just as a side note, I am Canadian. I love Vancouver. And I've been to Martha's Vineyard, and honestly, I think Vancouver wins, hands down. If you've never been, maybe this story will convince you otherwise to go, but it's pretty great. It's warm weather, except for when it rains every now and then, which is, alright, it's not every now and then. It rains a lot, but it's really nice weather when it's not raining, and there's great food, especially seafood. And I met Neil Patrick Harris there once, so clearly Vancouver's where everybody's going, guys. So very similar to how the Kennedys put Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts on the map, it is rumored that the royal family, meaning just Harry and Meghan, will apparently be taking over Vancouver Island. And according to marketing experts, they are saying that this is going to heighten housing prices and create a really big tourist hub for the island. So Vancouver Island is slightly bigger than the state of Maryland, and it is home to more than 800,000 people. The average home costs around $1,360,000 USD. Obviously, that is a different number in Canadian dollars, but I'm going to let you do the math. This is the marketing podcast, not the housing real estate podcast in Vancouver. But they're pretty expensive houses, but it's rumored that apparently once the royals come in and decide to keep a permanent residence on the island, the housing demand will increase, driving up already high property values. Not to mention, construction jobs were already on the rise due to demand for homes in 2019. So it's predicted that this will then double again as more people want to build on Vancouver Island. So it's very interesting to see how the impact of the royal family is already affecting Canada. Obviously, Canada and the UK are very close together. I'm not going to get into the politics of that. But it is very interesting to see how they're taking control of where they're living, and they're making it a tourist destination, even though they're moving there to be private and alone. I don't know if they wanted this, if they didn't want this, but it doesn't really matter if they wanted it or not. It's happening. People are going to follow them to Vancouver. People are going to go to Vancouver more now because they know the royals are there. They're basically tastemakers for the entire world, and it's very similar to how the Kennedys put Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts on the map. But it's going to be a huge development for Vancouver, Canada. So the royal family definitely does have a huge impact when they travel, just due to how many people want to follow them and how many people take their recommendations on things like this. And we're going to talk about all that and more on today's podcast. But this was just a very interesting story that came up in the news recently. And so I'll be very excited to see how it progresses over the next year, as they're kind of one of the first people in recent history, at least, to leave the royal family. Not that they're fully leaving it. We're going to talk about that later. So it'll be interesting to see how they act in Vancouver, Canada, if they act like they're royals, if they act like they're normal people, because I do think that will impact Vancouver Island's marketing and tourist destination numbers. Our third story of today is that the NBC's new TV show, Zoey's Extraordinary Playlist, is teaming up with Spotify. So, Zoey's Extraordinary Playlist, first of all, let me just say, even reading this story got me in the mood to go watch this show. I had zero interest, but then I was like, I wonder if this is true. And now that I've watched the show and I know that this story is true, we're going to get into the story, don't worry. I'm like, I want to do an entire podcast episode on this show. The way they're intertwining brands and marketing, it's just really fun and it's really innovative. And how they teamed up with Spotify is super, super extraordinary, if you will. So, NBC Universal unleashed a full-court multi-platform marketing campaign using YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Bustle, Playbill, and most interestingly, they used Spotify. Spotify not only created content using the Discovery engine, but it also incorporated a video streaming for the first time. with an entertainment marketing partner. So for the first time, people were actually able to watch something on Spotify. Spotify is normally, there'll be little clips that sort of play in the background of songs, but there was never a full-length episode like there is now of Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. Not only that, users can subscribe to Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist and get soundtracks from the first 3 episodes, and this playlist will continue to upload new songs as the episodes premiere on TV. So if you're subscribed to the playlist, then you will be able to hear the songs ahead of the episode, and you'll be the first one to get to hear the soundtrack and get to hear all of these beautiful renditions of songs from the cast. So it was just a really interesting way to see Spotify sort of use their marketing, but also advance their program a little bit to allow video streaming to happen on the platform and on the app so that they could better incorporate with this TV show. And also, when I watched the TV show last night, Spotify is a heavy part of the show. Most notably, there's a scene where the main character is about to go into an MRI, and the MRI technician asks her what kind of music she'd like to play. He has Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Play. He chooses Spotify, and you get to see him create a playlist that is called the MRI Jams or something like that. But it's like a little commercial for how you can use Spotify and how you can customize your playlist on Spotify. So really great sort of combination of 2 brands here. And again, like I said, they talked about so many different brands on Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist that it might make an extraordinary episode. So perhaps if you'd like to see that, write it in the review down below or let me know through social media. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, we are going to be talking about the royal family and their marketing. So stay tuned for that. You are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast covers everything tech. The hottest mobile phones, tablets, games. We review it, rate it, test it. Whether you're Microsoft or Apple, Android or iPhone, we'll give it to you black and white. The Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast.
And welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on today's episode, we are talking about the royal family. The royal family, they might not be as involved with marketing as we might think on first glance, but the truth is that the royal family has been leveraging their image, their brand, and cultivating a following for decades. So they are definitely worth examining and definitely worth taking a look at for your business. And we're going to talk about a lot of things on today's podcast. We're going to talk about what they do, examples of how they do it, some stats and facts, and I'm going to tell you how you can do similar things to the royals with your marketing. Obviously, you don't have the following of the royal family yet, or maybe you do, I don't know. But this can be a great way to sort of think in the same mindset as if you did. That way you are always creating content for your audience that is worth the entire UK nation. Like, the royal family is beloved by so many people, and if you want your content to be loved, then stay tuned for these little tips and tricks of how to do it. But just to get started, let's take a look at what they actually do so that you can learn and start to think about how you can incorporate those ideas with your marketing as well. So the first thing they always do is they leverage their image always and in all ways. This is really key for the royal family, is that if something happens, if a mistake happens, if, say, Prince Harry is photographed doing something crazy like being naked with a British flag, I think that's what happened, then they know how to leverage their image. They know how to control the situation. They know how to always look at the public and how they want the public to look at them. Number 2, they don't put charity last. They make it a central part of their work. So it would be very simple and very easy for the royal family just to give money to charity, or once a year on Christmas show William and Charles at a food bank. But instead, the royal family makes charity a large part of their work because they understand that giving back is just as important as getting from the public. And since the royal family has to be seen as leaders and as matriarchs and patriarchs of the country, then it's super important for them to always be showing that they are grateful and that they are giving back to the community, and that it's not just something they do in their free time, that it is a central part of their work. They dress for success. So this can mean a lot of different things, and we'll talk about it more and how you can do it, because it is a small thing, but it is a big part of their marketing, is that, especially for, we'll say, Kate and Meghan, there are certain rules that they have to follow of how they dress and how they act in public. But the Queen can do whatever she wants. And so I think take this message as a tool for branding. It doesn't mean that you always have to be dressing like Kate and Meghan, although I wish we all could. I wish we all had their closet. It does mean, however, to express yourself and demonstrate to the world who you are and what your company is from how you dress and how you present yourself. Very similar to how the Queen will always wear bright colors. The choice to wear bright colors of the Queen is determined not only by her taste and style, but also by the fact that it is just easier to recognize her in a crowd, which is completely fair. She's getting older, and she's little. And so the fact that she wears things like lime green and scarlet red really helps you pick her out in a crowd and go, right, that's the Queen. And the fact that it is her own personal style just makes this a little bit more true, because she's obviously very opinionated, and she likes to show her opinions through how she dresses and how she presents herself to the world. Number 4, they stay fresh and they always find new channels to communicate. So Meghan and Harry were the first members of the royal family to ever have Instagram. They broke some records. We'll talk about that later. But the royal family has had a Twitter for a couple of years now, and they know how to use it. They know how to talk to the people with it, and they've always been staying on top of what the new channels are and what the new trends are and how to communicate properly with their public. Number 5, consistency is key for the royal family. So very similar to how I said the Queen always wears bright colored clothing, but you will always see Meghan and Kate dressed not similarly, but very similar in ways of they're not wearing short shorts, they're not wearing mini dresses, they're not wearing glitter, they're not wearing scarlet red, they're not wearing lime green, because being consistent with how they look and how they act and how they speak in interviews and to the press and to the public, it always needs to be consistency, because that's their brand. They are the royal family. They are something to be respected, and you can see that from how they dress and how they act. Number 6, they're human. This is such a simple one, but it really does go really, really far with both marketing and marketing for the royal family, because at the end of the day, they're people. They really are. People will line up for hours to go watch them or just get a glimpse of them. I remember one time when the Queen Elizabeth came to Calgary, Alberta, she pulled over and all of the cars were like watching her just to get a glimpse of her, and I saw her hand and that was it. But I remember feeling enlightened all day. So I think we all have this understanding that they're more than people, but at the end of the day, they're just human. And sometimes they show us that they're human by doing things like Harry and William are very open about talking about the death of their mother, Princess Diana, and how they've dealt with their mental health issues around it, and how they are very open about how other people should be open about it as well. So although it's important to be human just for your own sake, it's also really great for your marketing, because then people want to interact with humans. They want to admire humans. They want to see your faults. Not all the time, though. We'll talk about that later. Number 7, they create a connection. So a lot of people might not know this, but if you give a gift to one of the royals, they have to accept it. And why is that? Because they create connections. They have to be polite. They have to make it seem like every person they meet is the most important person in the entire world. My mother-in-law has an amazing story about meeting Princess Diana and Prince Charles years ago when she was in Calgary, Alberta, and how they acted as if they were the most important people. They thanked her for her work. They thanked her for coming out today. So they really do try to create a connection with every single person they meet and interact with, both in person and online. Number 8, they put guidelines into place. So like I said earlier, it really does come back sometimes to how they dress, but Meghan and Kate both can't have dark-colored nail polish because there's guidelines in place like that. And it's not just how they dress, it's how they talk in interviews, it's how they talk online, it's how they create a connection, and it's how they present themselves. And they do this by putting out guidelines to how and what and why the royals should behave the way they behave. Number 9, they always keep the conversation flowing. So we're going to talk about sometimes the royal family perhaps didn't keep the conversation flowing, but then we're always going to circle back to, but wait, they did. They just didn't do it maybe as obvious as we thought. Keeping the conversation flowing for the royals doesn't mean that they're going to comment on every news headline, doesn't mean that a statement's going to be released every time Prince Harry does something that's similar to Prince Harry's brand, but it does mean that they always want to keep the conversation moving so that nobody gets stuck on something that the royals are doing. Rather, the conversation is always about the royals, but the conversation is always moving about the royals. So things are never just, the royal family is doing this, we're going to talk about this for months. No, it's the royal family is doing this today, but don't worry about it because tomorrow there's a news story, and today there's a news story, and next hour there's a news story, and next minute. So they're constantly keeping that conversation flowing and moving so that nobody has time to really stop and examine each individual story or ask questions is the big part. Number 10, they know which platforms to use. So the royal family social media accounts include 6.9 million followers on Instagram, 5 million likes on Facebook, and 4.1 million followers on Twitter. So they obviously have a huge following, and you might be wondering, why does the royal family need Twitter? For all of the other situations that I've described already in the top 10 reasons of how they utilize their marketing. If they want to keep the conversation flowing, if they want to show a connection, if they want to be human, then using these platforms is a really great way for them to be human, to keep the conversation flowing, and to create a connection. They go where the country goes. They go where the community is going. And if the entire community is on Twitter, is on Instagram, and is on Facebook, then they need to be as well so that they can continuously be engaging and talking with and connecting with their public. So it's super important for them to always be engaging and always knowing which platform to use and which ones not to use. A really great example is we are never going to see, I'm going to say it right now, guys, we are never going to see the Queen on TikTok. That's not going to happen. Things would have to go really, really wrong to see the Queen on TikTok. But the fact that she's on Twitter, the fact that there's an Instagram now is huge because it means that they understand which platforms to use to connect with their community. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, I'm going to give you the top 10 examples of times the royal family used marketing to keep the conversation flowing. So stay tuned for that because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and on today's episode, we are talking about the royal family. The royal family is so interesting. I don't know if anybody else finds them as interesting as I do, but if you do, if this podcast sparked maybe more interest about them, or you have questions about anything I talked about in relation to the royal family, go ahead and pop a review down below or reach out through social media. I'm always over there talking and chit-chatting and sharing ideas with you guys. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, or you have any ideas you want shared, then go ahead and head over there and just take a look at our social media and talk along with us. The conversation is always going on, and we really love sharing ideas over there as well. So now let's get right back into today's episode. We are going to be talking about the top 10 times the royals used marketing, used their brand consistency to keep the conversation flowing and to keep the conversation moving, and also to demonstrate and connect to the world who they are and what they are about. So the first one was Prince Harry. Everything I do reminds me of her. We talked about before the break about how the royals use being human to connect and to strengthen their relationships with their public. And this was a really beautiful and a really touching time that happened. So in a recent documentary, Harry and Meghan, An African Journey, Prince Harry got very honest about his relationship and his overwhelmingly emotional trauma about losing his mother. It was obviously something that would impact anyone in a situation like that, especially considering he was quite young, and it was a very dramatic and public and awful death that did happen, and people have talked about it and have created conspiracy theories, and it's been recreated in film and in documentaries, but a boy still lost his mother. It's still extremely sad. It is extremely awful to have to think about, and a lot of times we don't get to see the royals actually mourn in the same way we would, but in this documentary, he really opened up in a very human way and said, every single time I see a camera, every single time I hear a click, every single time I see a flash, it takes me straight back. His mental health, he said, is in constant management. Everything he does reminds him of her. So this was a very touching example, and I don't really want to use it too strongly in the terms of he was doing something to sort of market himself, but also this wasn't a documentary about him and Meghan, and it was really trying to show them as human people, as normal people who have fallen in love and who want to help the world, and this was a really great way to show that he's human by opening up about the death of his mother. Number 2, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided to leave the royal family. So depending on when you're listening to this podcast, this could be breaking news or it could be old news, and they've been living in Vancouver, Canada for years now. But Prince Harry and Meghan Markle did decide to leave the royal family. The announcement said they have intended to take a step back as senior members of the royal family and work to become financially independent, while continuing to fully support Her Majesty the Queen. They also wrote that they will split their time between North America and the UK. So it was super interesting to see this development happen, but also it wasn't really a shock to anybody, especially considering that Meghan had just signed a deal with Disney saying that she was going to be involved with some of their new projects on Disney Plus, as she is an actress, and they'd been spending a lot of time in North America as well. So I think the biggest shock really was that they were going to be taking a step back as senior members, but were they really active members to begin with? Yes, they were at all the events, but Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were never going to be queen and king. It never appeared they were. And so it does really make a lot of sense for them to take a step back and just sort of be able to be human. So it was very interesting, obviously, but I want to talk about from a marketing perspective of how they handled it. And certain things in their statement really show how they always keep the conversation flowing and how they leverage their personas and how they leverage their style through this statement. And one of the things that really stands out is that they will be continuing to fully support Her Majesty the Queen. So I think they really wanted to make it clear that this is not a negative leaving, this is not a fight, this is not anything to do with their family. It really is just them taking a step back. So they kept the conversation moving and they kept the conversation flowing, and they didn't create any negative press about this. Number 3, Kate and William broke up. I say that with a question mark because when I heard about this, I was quite shocked. But apparently right before they did get married, they broke up. Prince William and Kate Middleton were both very honest during their engagement interview about their brief split. We both were very young. It was at university. We were sort of both finding ourselves as such and being different characters and stuff. It was very much trying to find our own way, and we were growing up. And so it was just sort of a bit of a space and a bit of things like that, and it worked out for the better, Prince William said, very inarticulately, I gotta say. That was a lot of buts, ums, and But what's super interesting about this is that they talked about it in their engagement interview. It was released that they had been broken up before. And it's just so interesting because they're known as like the fairy tale romance. Everybody wants what William and Kate has. They fell in love. It was like Cinderella. That wedding was watched by the entire world. So it was super interesting for them to talk about their breakup in such a public way, considering would it ever have come out that they'd been broken up? And that's the thing. It may have. They went to a very public university. They were very much so in the public eye when they were dating. So by being able to get ahead of that story and talking about the breakup in a positive way for both of them, they are keeping the conversation flowing, they are leveraging their style, and that they are creating consistency with their story. Number 4, Duchess Catherine on becoming a mother has been a huge challenge. So, gosh, a lot of these examples really are times that the royals showed that they were human in order to leverage their marketing and their brand. But this was a really great example because I think we all looked to Princess Kate as, the end-all be-all. She was the mother we all want to be. So when Princess Catherine, walked out of the hospital with her brand new baby, people were like, how does she look so good? I didn't look that good after labor. And it wasn't that it was a negative conversation, but I think they realized that they had an opportunity to make a bit of a difference, and they had her come out and talk about how hard it actually is being a mother and how she understands what other mothers go through, even though she is a duchess, even though she is a part of the royal family. So this was a really great way to connect with people who were maybe a little put off by the fact that she had just come out of the hospital glowing and looking fantastic. This was a really great way to show her as a human and for her to connect with other mothers. So she said in a statement, "Personally, becoming a mother has been such a rewarding and wonderful experience. However, at times, it has also been a huge challenge, even for me, who has a support at home that most mothers do not." She went on to say, "Nothing can really prepare you for the sheer overwhelming experience of what it means to become a mother. It is full of complex emotions of joy, exhaustion, love, and worry, all mixed together. Your fundamental identity changes overnight. You go from thinking of yourself as primarily an individual to suddenly being a mother, first and foremost. And yet there is no rule book, no right or wrong. You just have to make it up and do the very best you can to care for your family. For many mothers, myself included, this can at times lead to a lack of confidence and feelings of ignorance." Guys, this was an amazing thing that she did. And it's incredible because it shows all of the ways we talked about before the break of how the royal family uses marketing and uses their brand to connect and to share and to present themselves as the royal family. She was honest, she was human, she kept the conversation flowing, she connected with her community, and she did it in just such an open way, but in such an articulate and specific way. Everything she said had been carefully thought through, but it still sounded honest and genuine, which is so important when it comes to the royal family because it could so easily become disingenuous. Number 5, Princess Diana's phone call. So in 1992, Prince Charles and Princess Diana were still married. However, media outlets published a transcript of a conversation between Diana and an alleged lover, James Gilby. In the conversation, Gilby told Diana that he loved her and called her by her pet name, Squidgy, 53 times. That's how the scandal earned the memorable moniker Squidgygate. Later in an interview, Diana did confirm that the conversation was real, but denied that it was adulterous in nature. So what is really interesting about this is not that Diana came out and said, yes, it's true, I had that conversation, but it wasn't adulterous, which clearly does sound like a cover-up. Instead, what's really interesting about this is the fact that shortly after, and we're going to talk about that example next after the break, it was revealed that Charles had been having an affair. So a lot of people, and this could be speculation, this could be a conspiracy theory, but believe that the media outlets got a hold of this transcript because the royal family were trying to get ahead of Charles being inappropriate in his marriage to Diana. So it's a conspiracy theory. We're not going to touch on it too much, guys. But so I don't know, that one's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but you guys are going to have to let me know what you think. Was Squidgygate in 1992 a big marketing plan from the royals? Let me know in the review down below or reach out through social media. I would really love to hear your guys' thoughts on this conspiracy theory. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, I'm going to give you the other top 5 times that the royal family used marketing to leverage their brand and connect with their community. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jakewish, and I'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jakewish, and on today's episode, we are talking about the royal family. Before the break, I gave you the top 5 times that the royal family used marketing to leverage their style, connect with their community, and promote their best selves. So now we are going to continue on with our list with number 6. Prince Andrew stepping back from his royal duties altogether in 2019. This all started when news allegations from Virginia Roberts, pictured with Andrew in a photo that I can tweet out later if anybody wants to see that, please reach out and let me know, accused Esteban of forcing her to have sex with the prince when she was just 17 years old. Although the allegations were from 2015, the case has resurfaced now because Prince Andrew said that he never knew Esteban, the person who was mentioned before. This all surfaced 4 days after a car crash interview with BBC Newsnight, where he spoke about his friendship with Esteban. Prince Andrew announced that he would be stepping back from his royal duties shortly after that. So this was all very splashy and in the news. It was obviously a really big conversation. However, you will notice it is no longer a conversation. Prince Andrew and the royal family took him out of the equation altogether when he announced he would be stepping back from his royal duties. So they kept the conversation moving. They didn't stay on it for too long. Obviously, there's a lot of serious news stuff that goes on behind this, and this story needs to be updated, and we could look into that further. But all I really wanted to take a look at is how they kept the conversation flowing and moving from this. Number 7, Prince Harry's rehab journey. After admitting that he had tried marijuana once, a 17-year-old Prince Harry spent a day That's right, 24 hours at the Featherstone Lodge Rehabilitation Center in London. A statement from the royal family said that Harry had agreed to visit the clinic to learn about the possible consequences of starting to take cannabis. So this was a really great example and one of the best ones I found of them moving the conversation and keeping the conversation flowing so that nobody got stuck at one point of the story. Nobody was like, Prince Harry's in rehab. Nope, Prince Harry was in rehab for 24 hours because he was learning about the possible consequences of cannabis, and it was just there for a learning opportunity, and they really showed that they were getting ahead of his possible drug problem, and that they were showing that they were raising him right, that he was still a good kid, and that everything was under control. Nobody needed to worry about it. So it was definitely a very clean and very concise way to deal with the problem before the problem got out of hand or before the news outlets really took hold of the story and just went wild with it. They got ahead of it, they put it to an end, and they sort of just put a stop to it altogether by keeping the conversation going. Number 8, when Meghan Markle walked herself down the aisle after her father got caught staging a paparazzi photos leading up to her wedding to Prince Harry. So this was a super interesting story, and I remember when it came out because Meghan Markle wasn't a part of the royal family yet, but there was already so much going around about her and about her family and about her relationship with her father and her relationship with her mother and her estranged sister and how she was a stepchild. There was just a lot of stuff going on about her family, and how they chose to deal with it is by just taking her family out of the equation. She walked herself down the aisle, which made a huge statement just to show what kind of person, what kind of style she was putting forward, that, she didn't need her dad, she was independent, and that she was the one who was marrying Harry so she could walk herself down the aisle towards him. So this was a really big deal. Obviously, not a lot of weddings had this happen before. A lot of people were speculating that maybe Charles should walk her down, or Prince William. There was a lot of ideas floating around, but the best idea that the royal family came up with was to allow her to walk herself down the aisle because it put forward a statement of who Meghan was, who her family was, and who she was about to become. Number 9, when Kate Middleton honored Princess Diana when Prince George was born. When she first emerged out of the hospital with her newborn Prince George for their first appearance after the birth, her light blue polka dot dress was a subtle tribute to the dress Princess Diana wore after Prince William was born. So this was a really great tribute to Princess Diana, and it was just a really great way to put their best foot forward. Princess Diana is obviously a beloved member of the royal family, especially for Prince William and Prince Harry, and so it was just a very sweet and a very nice tribute that Kate Middleton did by wearing a similar dress that Princess Diana wore walking out of the hospital. What is really interesting about this, though, is you're probably wondering, well, what did this achieve from a marketing perspective? Well, in the same way that when Meghan Markle walked herself down the aisle showed what kind of person she was, Kate representing Princess Diana showed what kind of person, wife, and mother she is. It showed that she obviously cared very deeply about her husband and her husband's feelings about his late mother. It showed that she cared about royal traditions, and it showed just how human she was and how important traditions like that were for her and for her family. And it just, one, it looked great on her, and two, it was just a very simple way to make a really big statement, but to make a very sweet statement. And so I always really loved that moment. I thought it was a really great example of the marketing that the royals do and just how the royals represent themselves in all aspects of their life. Nobody needed her to make a statement that day. Nobody needed her to look that good leaving the hospital. But Kate Middleton understood about how the royal family presents themselves and how important it is to always be representing the royal family at every moment. She doesn't really get a moment to herself, right? I'm sure there was a moment in the hospital, but she wasn't going to get that moment that we all get leaving the hospital when we're, wearing that big diaper and your hair's probably a mess and no makeup. No, she understood that she needed to be leaving the hospital looking like Kate Middleton and representing the royal family. Number 10, when Kate Middleton broke royal protocol in Germany. Kate Middleton greeted a group of children with warm hugs while visiting a charity in Germany. Typically, there is a handshake-only rule, but she went around and she just hugged all of those children of all ages and just was warm and kind and giving. And I really loved this example because it's very similar to her wearing the polka dot dress, but it also shows that sometimes the rules get broken, but when the rules get broken, they do them with a point and for reason. It was to show how warm of a mother she is and how warm of a person and a symbol and how human the royal family is, that yes, it's a handshake only rule, but she wasn't going to let that stop her from hugging a child, not something she cared about at this charity, which also reminds me of one of the ways we talked about earlier. It shows that charity really is the heart of their work. If she was willing to drop protocol and really embrace with those children and embrace what was happening around her. Okay, everybody, there were our top 10 examples of times the royals used marketing to promote themselves, to keep the conversation flowing, and to really just put their best foot forward while engaging with their community. If you have an example you would like me to talk about, or you have an example you just want me to share that you didn't know about before the podcast, or you have a question about any of these examples, please feel free to reach out through social media or write a review down below. For now, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, we are going to talk about how you can use the royal marketing tools and strategies in your own marketing day-to-day. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on today's episode, we are talking about the royal family. We are talking about the ways that they promote themselves to their public, how they engage with their community, and how they utilize marketing to always keep the conversation flowing and to make sure no scandals or stories get out of hand. So right now what I want to talk about is how you can use their techniques that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast in your own marketing. So number one, how can you leverage your image in all ways? So how the royals do it is that they always ensure that they're always proper, they're always dressed nice, we're going to talk more about that later, and that they're always putting their best foot forward. And you can do this really simply by ensuring that your branding and your image is always concise and is always present in everything you're promoting and in all of the content you are creating. You can do this with logos, with colors, with fonts, with imagery, with a brand ambassador, with many brand ambassadors, with celebrity endorsements. There are so many different ways that you can leverage your image, but the main thing to always consider is that your image needs to be consistent. So whether you're at an event, whether you're creating a billboard, whether you're creating a social media post, your image always needs to be public, and it always needs to be concise, and it always needs to be considered. Number two, don't put charity last. Make it the central part of your work. So we talked a lot about how the royals always ensure that charity is the central part of their work. They're always very charitable. They're always very proper. They're always very giving, and all of these wonderful things. Now, I'm not expecting all of you to suddenly change how you're doing business or how you're giving back to the community, but you need to find out what your charity is, if that makes sense. Not that you need a specific charity to be giving money to or anything like that, but if the royals' main point in their lives is to give back to the community, to show how charitable they are, then what is the main point in your business? What is the main thing you're selling? And whatever that is, make it the central part of your work. What is the point to what you're selling? What is the value it is giving to the world? Once you figure that out, put it in the central part of all of your marketing, of all of your branding, of all of your imagery, of all of your social media. Number 3, make sure that you are always putting your best foot forward in the same way that it's not really possible for a royal to be overdressed. A sense of occasion can work for just about anyone in the royal family. So when I say this, I don't want you to be like showing up in evening gowns to your next marketing meeting. But what I am suggesting is that you're always putting your best foot forward, both with how you present yourself in the marketing world and how your company is presented in the marketing world. Even if you sell something that isn't exactly fancy or proper, say you sell like toilets, you still need to be presenting yourself in a very elegant and sophisticated way to ensure that you're being taken seriously. I'm not saying that you can't add humor. I'm not saying you can't have jokes, but what I am saying is that you need to always be presenting yourself as if you're something to be taken seriously. Number 4, make sure you stay fresh and always find new channels to communicate with your community. So this is very similar to how the royals know when to go into Twitter, when to join Instagram, hopefully they'll never join TikTok, when to go out into the public, when to host an event, when to have a royal wedding. They always know the different channels that they have available to them to communicate with their community. However, sometimes new channels come up and they need to be adaptable and be willing to change so that they are able to better create a connection with their community. So what I'd like you to do right now is to take out a pen and paper and write down the ways in which you can find a new channel to communicate with your community and how you can better utilize the channels you already have to keep that conversation going. Number 5, consistency is key. This is true with any marketing podcast I will do. I'm going to talk about this until you are sick of hearing me talk about this. It is so incredibly important that everything you do is consistent. If you're sending out a tweet, if you're meeting somebody at an event, if you're just out and about but you're the face of the company, you need to be in consistent alignment with the brand. Everything you do is a reflection of your company. Everything you put out into the world is a reflection of your product, of all the hard work you've been doing for years, for months, for days, for hours, which is why it is so key, which is why it is so important that everything you put into the world is consistent. Even if what you're putting into the world isn't extraordinarily elegant or wonderful or valuable, it is to you and it should be to you. So make sure it's consistent. Make sure it's worth your own while to be putting into the world. Number 6, be human. We've talked a lot on this podcast about how the royals are just people. That's all they are. They're human, and they show their human side by talking about the death of Princess Diana, by talking about their divorces, by talking about their breakups, by talking about their struggles in the world. And so by being human, they allow people to be able to connect with them and create a connection with them that they might not have, which is something I really want to encourage you guys to do, specifically with your social media. It can be so easy for a business just to become a business. And I'm not saying you want your social media to be solely the intern that you have running your social media. You probably don't want the company to just be represented by them, but make sure you have a consistent voice in your social media that allows people to connect with them on a human level. Number 7, create a connection. These are so closely tied together, being human and creating a connection. But what I was trying to get at with being a human is by showing people your faults and by showing people, hey, we're human too. We also use the product, or sometimes we struggle with this part of the product. Netflix is really known for doing that, is that they're like, hey, this is annoying too. Let's all talk about it. But when you're creating a connection, you're not talking about your faults. You're talking about your good attributes that you bring to the table. You're saying, hey, use us. Use us because we want to be a part of your family. We want to be a part of your world. We want to be friends. We want to have a conversation going. We want to build a connection outside of the real world, because the real world is on digital now and everything's on digital. So if you want to create a connection outside of the digital world, then you're going to have to make people believe that you're something outside of the digital world as well, that you are actually a human. Number 8, put some guidelines into place. So this can be done in a lot of different ways. The Royals obviously have a lot of different ways in doing this, but the main thing that they always do is that they sometimes break their guidelines, which we'll talk about in a minute, but there's always guidelines that they will never break. You're never going to hear a royal curse. You are never going to see a royal drunk, except for Prince Harry. You are going to see them always be putting their best foot forward. They are always going to be representing the family, and they're always going to be promoting this higher level of elegant excellence, which is all done purposely by these guidelines that allows them to do that. Kate and Meghan can only wear nude color nail polish. They can't be wearing glittery eyeshadow. There are so many different small guidelines that are put into place, and some of them get broken and some of them need to get broken, but they're put into place so that the royal family can sort of have this rule book that they turn to and say, oh, right, this is how we are our best selves. This is how we represent our community. This is how we connect with our community. So this can be done by a brand guidelines for your company. Do you have a tangible object, whether online or in front of you, that has the guidelines to your company? So that if someone new comes on board, they can just open up this book, open up this PDF, and see how big your logo has to be on every image, how the colors of the brand need to flow in this direction, how the spacing of letters needs to be. All of these things need to be accounted for and put into a guideline so that people are able to look back on it and really just get a consistent image of the brand. Number 9, always keep that conversation flowing. We've talked about this a lot on today's podcast, but it really is super, super important that you always keep that conversation flowing. Don't get stuck on one sale. Don't get stuck on one promotion. Don't get stuck on one hiccup in your business. Always keep the conversation flowing and always keep the conversation moving. If you have an event on Friday, then on Saturday, I better see a post on your social media about not only a thank you post, make sure you're doing that. If you have any questions about a thank you post, go listen to our event marketing podcast. But on Saturday, I want to see you post about your next promotion, about your next sale, about your next event. Don't just get stuck on the one event that you hosted. Always have something new coming. Always keep that conversation moving and flowing. Number 10, know which platform to use. So the royal family knew when it was time to get onto Instagram. They knew when it was time to start tweeting. They knew when it was time to have likes on Facebook, to be posting consistent content. Do you know which platforms to use for your company? The royal family knows that they have no business being on TikTok or on Snapchat or on YouTube. So they stick to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter because they know that that's where their community is. Do you know where your community members are? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Instagram? Are they on Snapchat? Are they on YouTube? If they are, then you need to be on there too. You need to constantly be connecting with them, and you really need to figure out which platforms to use to best connect with them. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, I am going to give you the top 10 stats and facts you may not know about the royal family and their marketing. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jakebush, and thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Today's episode is a lot of fun because we've been talking about the royal family. We've been talking about all the ways they leverage their style, their unique perspective, and their brand to better connect with their community and to promote themselves as being a family to turn to that are always royal, regal, and role models to a certain extent. So now that we are back from our break, I am going to talk about the top 10 stats and facts about the royal family that might shock you that do impact their marketing. I'm not going to lie, full disclosure, some of these were put in here because I was really just shocked to find these out about the royal family. So they might not directly relate to your marketing, but they do relate to the royal family and how they use their image to market themselves. When Harry and Meghan broke a world record by getting 1 million followers in under 6 hours, it took them 5 hours and 45 minutes to reach 1 million followers on their official Instagram account. This was record-breaking not only for how long it took, but also because there wasn't an Instagram account for a royal family member before this, not to my knowledge at least, and it was also a very big deal when Meghan Markle took down her Instagram right before the royal wedding. So it was super interesting to see them relaunch it as a couple and also to see them break all of these records. I definitely was one of the first million, not bragging, but I don't know, you get to be a part of history. It was kind of cool. Number 2, Queen Elizabeth travels with a supply of her own blood. This was one of the weird ones I was talking about, guys. The marketing lesson to take away from here is that always be prepared. It's just super interesting and super weird, but I guess if she has a specific type of blood and they want to keep her alive, if something happens, it's good that she travels with her own. Being prepared, guys, super important when it comes to marketing. Due to a recent poll that took place right before the royal wedding, Prince Charles is the least favorite of all the royals. I found this super funny, especially considering from a marketing perspective of the royal that has always been the most hated really is Prince Charles, mostly due to the Princess Diana scandal. So it was really interesting to see that people are still so negative towards Prince Charles and that people cared. There were so many people involved with this poll. I definitely recommend you go check it out. I'll tweet it out later. It's just super interesting to see that people care so much about the royals enough to rate them. Number 4, the family filmed a secret documentary. In June of 1969, a documentary aired about the royal family. It'll never be shown again because Queen Elizabeth and her trusted advisors decided that it probably wasn't best for the royals to be shown in such a realistic way to the public, showing their everyday life to what they do on an everyday occasion when they're not all dressed up, when they're not all out being the royal family. So this was just a really great example of how they always do try to put their best foot forward, and they don't want to give anything away that might ruin their reputation. Number 5, the Queen's skirt is weighed down. This was another weird one. The Queen's got some weird ones, but this one makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about the type of image and the type of persona Queen Elizabeth wants to project to her public. So obviously Queen Elizabeth is constantly flying, she's constantly on aircrafts, but you'll notice in every photo the skirt that she is wearing stays perfectly still. Why is that? It's because it's weighted so that it won't fly up by the aircraft, so that a gust of wind can't come in Marilyn Monroe style blow up her skirt, which honestly, I think everyone should get some weighted skirts when they're on an airplane. I've seen some stuff, guys. I don't want to see it. And I'm glad Queen Elizabeth was thinking ahead. And if anyone on Etsy is selling these weighted skirts, put me on the list because I'd really like to buy them. Number 6. The Queen celebrates her birthday twice. For over 260 years, over 1,400 soldiers, 200 horses, and 400 musicians gathered to parade around the official celebration of the Souvenir's birthday on the second Saturday in June. It's called the Trooping of the Color. Queen Elizabeth, however, her actual birthday is on April 21st. So she gets two. She gets one on June and on April 21st. And the reason I put this on the list is because, hey, if you got something to celebrate, celebrate it hard. And also traditions are super important to the royal family, so it's super important that they keep them up as that is a part of their brand and is a part of their brand identity. Number 7, seafood is off the menu for any royals that are traveling. If a royal family were to come to Seattle right now and come to my home, I would not be allowed to serve them seafood. It is too commonly known to cause sickness, so they have to stay away from it because nobody wants to see a royal sick. It's one of those guidelines that was put in place to protect their image and to protect their brand, so it's something they have to uphold no matter how silly it may seem. Kate and Meghan and any royal woman always has to have a natural manicure. So despite the fact that Queen Elizabeth can wear lime green skirts and hats, you will never see Kate, Meghan, or any of the royal women having brightly colored nails, glittery nails, or even a French tip. It is a custom for royal women to have their nails painted with a light color or nude. So it's super important for them to always be presenting themselves in an elegant way and in an elegant fashion. And so this is just one of those guidelines that, again, was put in place to ensure that that is always happening. Number 9, the Queen owns the most swans in the United Kingdom. Let me say that again. The Queen owns the most swans in the United Kingdom? That is crazy. Who gave this woman so many birds? Is this just her hobby? What a weird thing to know. What a weird stat to have. But on the River Thames, Queen Elizabeth has shared her ownership of most of the swans that reside there. Other swans are owned by other people in the community, but she owns the majority share, which is just weird. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I find that super weird, but also super amazing that even Queen Elizabeth has hobbies, and hers apparently is swans. That's not really anything to do with marketing, but I thought everybody needs to know that Queen Elizabeth owns the majority of swans in the United Kingdom. Number 10, the family member with the highest net worth isn't the Queen. Are you ready to hear who it is? Drum roll, please. It is the tiny, the adorable, the lovely, the so cute Princess Charlotte. Princess Charlotte has an estimated worth of $5 billion. The reason for Charlotte's incredibly high value is due to her actual fashion influence, which is also just crazy. Basically, she is just known around the world for having great style, and people want their children to look like Princess Charlotte. So a lot of brands give her a lot of clothing, and a lot of things are made after her. This all started when she wore a pastel pattern yellow cardigan worn by a popular British department store. After she was seen wearing it, the department store sold out within 24 hours. That is crazy for a little girl to have that kind of control over the fashion world, and also to have the most amount of net worth out of the entire royal family. If you're curious about any other stats about the royal family, I will be tweeting some of them out later today, so make sure you look out for those. Okay, everyone, that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. And make sure you tune in for our next episode. We post new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We're also always active over on social media, so go check us out over there. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the GSMC Marketing News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to any podcast app and you'll find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news, you'll find it all on the GSMC Podcast Network. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.